Our story begins with our totally useless protagonist, a young man named Noor, hard at work, cleaning a canal for an old lady. Hey, everyone's got to start somewhere. Once he finished, the granny beamed with joy, signed his receipt, and sent him off. Next, we spot Noor lugging heavy packs at a construction site. His boss praised him, saying thanks to his effort, the project would stay on schedule. Just as things were looking up, Noor heard a woman's desperate cries from a nearby cave. Without hesitation, he dashed inside, only to find a group of knights battling a hulking minotaur. Flashback time. As a child, Noor cared for his sick mother, fed the goats, and managed the farm while his father was out buying milk and, well, never came back. His mother, feeling guilty, called herself useless and told him to live the life he wanted. That same night, she passed away. Noor buried her, tended the farm alone, and one day discovered an adventure book. The book told legendary tales, heroes slaying dragons, learning magic from ancient sorcerers, breaking curses, and even obtaining miracle elixirs. Inspired by these stories and his mother's words, Noor decided to become an adventurer. He bid farewell at his parents' graves and set out for the royal capital. Awestruck by the size of the city, he eventually found the Adventurers Guild. Unfortunately, the clerk at the desk shooed him away. This isn't daycare, kid. Noor calmly replied that his parents were long gone. That sobering truth softened the man's tone, and at last he asked for Noor's name. The guild clerk finally told Noor he should attend the royal training school. After all, they'd never seen a kid his age wanting to join, and every adventurer needed at least one job skill: swordplay, magic, anything. Excited, Noor agreed, imagining himself as a swordsman cleaving dragons the size of mountains with a single swing. Soon, Noor joined the swordsman class and trained diligently. One classmate lit up the yard by activating a fire skill, and within months, other students were unlocking flashy techniques too. Meanwhile, Noor's only talent was parrying. Lots and lots of parrying. His instructor finally told him to quit. It was pointless. Noor begged for more time, but the instructor shut him down, suggesting he try another path. Disappointed but not broken, Noor switched to warrior training. Warriors were supposed to be tough, fearless, and wield any weapon imaginable. After weeks of grueling practice, the instructor admitted Noor had slightly improved physically, but warned that if he kept forcing himself, he'd probably die. Not exactly the progress he wanted. Next up, Hunter School. Fail. His instructor, a very patient woman, informed him he had zero sense for handling delicate weapons. Then Thief School. Another disaster. He couldn't disarm traps or even sense an enemy sneaking up on him. Then came Magic Class. Surprisingly, Noor managed to create a flame so tiny it could barely light a candle. His teacher was almost impressed, not because it was good, but because she'd never seen anyone that bad at magic before. Lastly, Noor tried cleric training. To everyone's shock, he actually healed minor scratches. Not much, but for someone with no natural blessing, it was impressive. And so, after 3 exhausting months of trying every class, Noor's grand record stood at parrying champion in swordsman school, mediocre muscles in warrior school, hopeless case in hunter and thief school, tiny firelighter in magic class, scratch healer in cleric training. Not the most glorious resume, but hey, at least he didn't give up. After failing every training school, Noor returned to the Adventurers Guild, hoping to register. Sadly, the man in charge shook his head. Without even one decent skill, Noor wasn't cut out to be an adventurer. Crushed, Noor went home and confessed to his parents' graves that he truly had no talent. Still, he refused to give up. He remembered his swordsman instructor's advice: master one skill by repeating it endlessly. So Noor built a training ground at home and dedicated himself to perfecting his parry. 1 year later, he could dodge 10 swords in a single breath. No new skills. 3 years later, 100 swords. Still no new skills. 10 years later, he could juggle 1,000 wooden swords while parrying like a machine, yet not a single new skill unlocked. 14 years later, yep, still just parry. At this point, even the goats probably thought he was crazy. Determined to give it one last shot, Noor returned to the guild as a grown man. The old clerk was gone, replaced by a young woman who awkwardly checked his papers. She advised him to try the royal training school again, but Noor explained he had already exhausted every class and their patience. Just as he was about to be rejected again, the old guild clerk finally showed up and recognized him. Noor explained his 14 years of relentless parrying, shocking the man. The clerk then revealed how adventurer ranks worked. S rank at the top, E rank at the bottom, except there was something even lower. That's right, F rank. A rank so obscure, most adventurers didn't even know it existed. It came with brutal restrictions. No monster hunts, no gathering materials outside the city, just odd jobs like canal cleaning and carrying luggage. Still, for Noor, this was a victory. After 14 years of paring sticks, he was finally, officially, an adventurer. The world's lowest ranked one, but an adventurer nonetheless. Almost no one ever chose F rank, because really, who signs up to be an adventurer just to run errands? Well, the guild clerk had just met the one guy dumb or stubborn enough, Noor. Without hesitation, he accepted the restrictions. The man side gave in and handed him an official F rank adventurer's license. Overjoyed, Noor immediately got to work. He ran errands across the city, hauling goods, fixing things, even cleaning canals again, all while keeping up his endless parry training. Ironically, those useless lessons from every failed training school made him incredibly efficient at odd jobs. His dream had come true. He was finally an adventurer, helping people in his own way. Anything more would be asking too much, or so he thought. Flashback over, we return to the cave. Noor stands frozen before a real living minotaur. He had only read about them in books, and in person, the beast was massive. It rampaged through the nights, protecting a young woman bound by magic chains, slaughtering them one by one. When only she remained, the minotaur raised its axe to strike her down. At the last second, Noor drew a fallen knight's sword and stepped in. He parried every swing of the beast's giant weapon, but with no way to counterattack, and his blade about to snap. Just as the minotaur turned back to finish the girl, Noor remembered his father's words. Give it your all to protect others. He did. His sword shattered, yet he blocked with the hilt. The recoil was so absurdly strong, the minotaur managed to behead itself with its own axe. Talk about killing yourself with bad luck. The magic chains binding the girl shattered. She thanked Noor for saving her, but he humbly refused to share his name. I'm no one important. He slipped away, reflecting that if even a runaway cow, okay, giant man-eating cow, was this dangerous, then he still had more training to do. Meanwhile, the rescued woman, Lady Lindbergh, a silver-haired noble, mourned the knights who had given their lives for her. A blonde knight rushed to her side, asking if she was hurt. Upon hearing she was safe, the knight dropped to one knee, apologizing for not having gone with her in the first place. However, Lady Lindbergh calmly replied that there was no point in having an escort during the trials for the fight for the throne. After all, she had been the one insisting on it, which meant the blonde knight, and was not at fault. At that moment, another knight, Lord Darkin, appeared and urged Lady Lindbergh to return to the castle since Lord Rain wished to speak with her later. A silver-haired young man then spoke up, saying he had talked with Lin and wondered if a minotaur had really been summoned to the city. That creature, after all, was a demon from the deepest layers of the abyss. Darkin confirmed it, and the young man concluded the incident had to be someone's doing. Darkin added that the source appeared to be a ring found on a merchant's corpse at the scene. Furthermore, when Oakham researched it, he discovered the magic stone in the ring was unusually pure, something you'd never see on the open market. Darkin then showed the ring to the silver-haired young man, who pointed out that a minotaur was a threat level a demon. In other words, no ordinary rich guy could just go shopping for a trinket that could trap something like that. Darkin added that Oaken had identified the crest on the stone as belonging to the magic empire of Duras. Both men knew Duras was always stirring trouble, but this time they had gone further. They had attacked the princess directly by binding her with a barrier. From then on, they agreed they needed to be more careful, especially since Duras wasn't even trying to hide the evidence. To the young man, it looked like Duras was just waiting for their kingdom to make the first move in a war. What they wanted, of course, were the resources, the relics hidden in the dungeon of the lost. Their conversation shifted to the mysterious man who had saved the princess. He had defeated the Minotaur in seconds with a single broadsword, and somehow even managed to lose the secret operatives tailing him. Honestly, the guy running the Adventurers Guild should probably retire. He clearly missed a gem when scouting. Meanwhile, speaking of gems, the guild master himself was sipping a drink at the Adventurers Guild when Noor arrived. He told Noor that a demon had appeared near the dungeon entrance the previous night. Since Noor had been in the area, the man said he was worried. Our protagonist recalled being followed around by a shady group of people that night, but decided not to mention it. Instead, he claimed he'd gone home early because he was tired. The guild master warned him that he was lucky, because even an rank adventurer would have been killed by that thing. He added that some mystery man had apparently killed the demon, making Noor think there really were some incredible people out there. Finally, as the guild master once again tried convincing Noor to quit being an F-rank adventurer and find a proper job, Lin appeared. This revelation shocked everyone present, but the sacred book of tropes clearly stated that nothing should be revealed at this point. After a carefully scripted conversation, Noor reluctantly agreed to go out with her, with the guildmaster still oblivious that he had saved her the previous night. Thanks to Lin's concealment and soundproofing skills, they managed to wander the city unnoticed. Once in a more discreet spot, Lin apologized for showing up so abruptly and asking him to step out while he was talking to the guild master. She thanked Noor again for saving her life, emphasizing that his actions had protected countless others in the kingdom. Naturally, Noor downplayed it, dense as ever, while Lin struggled to get through to him. Seriously, she had to say, he killed a powerful demon and saved the princess. But somehow it didn't sink in. Lin then insisted on properly thanking him. First, she offered to introduce him to her father. He refused. Next, she tried to give him a gift for saving her life. Again, he refused. After some persistence, Noor finally yielded, agreeing to meet her father, though he made it clear he didn't want anything extravagant. Using his skills once more, Lin led Noor to her manor. There, she asked for his name, and he revealed it was Noor. Embarrassed, she apologized for forgetting to introduce herself and said her full name was Lin Bergclay, but asked him to call her Lin. Of course, she didn't immediately tell him she was a princess. Later, they met Anne, the blonde knight, and Lin told her she wanted to see her father, and warned that he was currently in the audience chambers with Lord Rain. When the princess revealed that Noor was the man who had risked his life to save her, and offered to guide them, though she admitted being wary of him, she secretly hoped Noor would join them as extra protection. After all, the more the merrier. Meanwhile, King Rain was telling Lord Rain that Duras didn't care about the non-aggression treaty, having already demanded all rights to the dungeon. When Lin's group arrived, King Rain scolded her for leaving the castle. She explained that she needed to find the man who had saved her life, no matter what. The king asked if Noor was the one, and she confirmed it. Noor apologized for his casual attire and lack of etiquette, since he hadn't expected to come to the castle that day. The king laughed at his words and formally thanked him, clearly amused by this dense but heroic adventurer. The king tried to reward Noor, but he refused, leaving the monarch in an awkward spot. After a moment's thought, the king grabbed a giant sword hanging on the wall and offered it to him. King Rain was astonished, but the king waved him off, saying the sword had long been nothing more than a decoration. Noor finally accepted it and was surprised by its weight. He tried one last time to refuse, but the king insisted. Then, Lin's father asked him to give it a swing. Using his physical enhancement, Noor swung the sword one-handed, impressing everyone in the hall. Nonchalantly, he commented that the sword wasn't that heavy, prompting whispers that it might be a legendary weapon. Afterward, the king asked Noor to help train Lin, worried about the dangers she might face. Noor politely refused, insisting parents shouldn't interfere too much with their daughters, almost making Anne explode with anger. Luckily, the king laughed it off, showing he wasn't offended. Noor then bid farewell and left the hall, still unaware that he had slain a demon and saved the princess. Before he could leave entirely, Anne stopped him. The blonde knight knelt and apologized for her earlier rudeness, explaining that her top priority was protecting the Clay family and that her behavior toward guests sometimes suffered as a result. She introduced herself as Anne Harness, vice captain of the Clay family's warrior corps, also known as the Divine Shield. She promised to help Noor whenever possible, since by saving Lin, he had also saved her. Anne added a stern warning. His behavior and speech during the audience with the king had been unpardonable. If he acted that way again, she wouldn't overlook it. Noor thanked her for the warning, but seemed mostly unfazed. Finally, she asked for his name. When he said he was Noor, she reacted oddly, then left. Before he could move, Gilbert appeared and challenged him to a sparring match. Noor was walking through a corridor with Gilbert, wondering what on earth the man wanted from him. He was exhausted and just wanted to go home. Eventually, they arrived at a sparring ring. Curious, Noor asked what he wanted, and Gilbert replied that he wanted a mock battle. This reminded Noor that he hadn't had a proper training partner since attending all those schools. Gilbert casually mentioned that, despite appearances, he was quite famous in the royal capital. He then invited Noor to pick a training weapon from the wall. Noor grabbed a sword immediately, thinking this was a godsend for a budding adventurer. Once ready, Noor wasn't sure how strong Gilbert would be, but he welcomed the opportunity to train with someone more skillful. The other guards present couldn't believe anyone would dare fight their captain. The battle began. Noor was instantly impressed by Gilbert's polished movements, perfect pace, and control. It was clear Gilbert had trained like a maniac to reach that level. But soon, Noor noticed something odd. The captain's movements were strangely slow. After a moment, Noor realized Gilbert was intentionally holding back. He asked him to stop, and told him he didn't need to hold back so much. That caught Gilbert's attention, and he even wondered if he had been slightly restrained because his opponent was just a normal human. Apologizing, Gilbert unleashed his full power. Suddenly, Noor noticed Gilbert was much faster, but he could still evade all the attacks. More importantly, every time Noor dodged, Gilbert left himself completely open, almost like he was luring him in. Noor kept thinking the captain wasn't fighting seriously, suspecting he had set a trap. Gilbert then attempted a sword skill, faint but precise, but Noor still managed to dodge with some effort. Realizing he could handle more, Noor encouraged Gilbert to speed up. The captain was startled by the challenge, and it made Noor seriously consider that Gilbert might finally be giving it his all. In that moment, Noor reflected on his own growth. All those 14 years of relentless training had made him stronger, and he finally understood just how much he could handle. Noor even thought he might actually win the mock battle, until Gilbert unleashed a powerful skill called Drag RVE, one of his best moves. The attack caught Noor completely by surprise. He barely managed to dodge it, but the effort left him humbled. Immediately, he admitted defeat and left the manor feeling troubled. The other guards were dumbfounded that anyone could evade that attack, but comforted themselves by noting that Gilbert had been using a practice spear with a wide tip. Meanwhile, Gilbert reflected on his own journey. From the start, he'd shown natural talent with the spear. The more he trained, the more polished his technique became, and the stronger he grew. Unfortunately, he quickly grew bored because he couldn't find a worthy opponent. His master eventually told him to go to the capital, where power was being amassed for an upcoming war. Even there, battling demons and skilled warriors, he found no one who could truly challenge him. Winning came easily, but it wasn't enough. One day, while resting, the swordsman instructor approached him, noticing Gilbert's gloomy expression. Despite having earned the prestigious title Spear Sovereign, Gilbert dismissed it as just another bothersome label. This amused the instructor, who hadn't realized that a title equal to his sword sovereign rank could be such a burden. Gilbert even expressed a desire to fight the instructor, but the man took him lightly, only hinting that someday someone might surpass him. Back in the present, Gilbert wondered about the kind of person who could defeat a minotaur alone. Noor made no sense to him. He showed no interest in lavish rewards, was even discourteous in the king's audience, and didn't seem to care about recognition. Yet, when pushed, Noor had faced Gilbert's final attack. The move was faster than the speed of sound, his strongest technique, and used recklessly just to let Noor feel the spear's power. Despite not fully understanding how it happened, Gilbert knew one thing: for the first time in a head-on battle, he had been thoroughly defeated. Even more astonishing, Noor had admitted defeat himself. As Gilbert observed the aftermath, he noticed huge cracks in the floor. He had no idea when or how Noor had created them. The young adventurer had left a mark that went far beyond skill alone. Nevertheless, one thing was certain: Noor had evaded Gilbert's best technique while the captain was at full strength. This meant our young hero had finally found the worthy opponent he had been searching for. From Noor's perspective, the attack had been nothing short of spectacular, but oddly, it crushed his confidence. After using physical enhancement and feather step to dodge it, he convinced himself that his success was only because Gilbert had held back just enough. Otherwise, he'd be dead. Noor even went so far as to think that Gilbert had deliberately warned him that pride leads to death. Oh, the irony. He truly redefined the concept of undervaluing your own strength. Sometime later, while resting on a hill and pondering new ways to underestimate his own abilities, Lin approached him with a special request. She wanted to become his page. Noor had no idea what that meant. She explained that a page was someone who managed their master's daily needs while absorbing knowledge and techniques. Naturally, he refused. But Lin was persistent. She argued that she could be useful. After all, Noor had achieved the highest marks in all 6 training schools. He dismissed her again, claiming there was nothing he could teach her. Maybe how to kill a minotaur, he quipped, but I can handle the rest myself. Undeterred, she offered her family's fortune as an instructor's fee. Noor refused. She tried again, showcasing the most powerful techniques she had learned from the 6 schools, but he still refused, thinking she had mistaken him for someone worth learning from. To prove a point, Noor demonstrated Tiny Flame, intending to show her his talent was mediocre. What he didn't know was that Oken had told Lin that the size of the flame reflected both training effort and comprehension. She was flabbergasted to see Noor's flame several times larger than Oken's. Apparently, in this world, size does matter. She recalled the legends of a boy who had completed all 6 schools full terms in just 3 months, thinking he didn't exist, until now. Seeing Noor's flame, she realized he truly was that prodigy. When he told her his other skills were at the same level, Lin was completely defeated. She had just made herself look silly by flaunting her abilities in front of a monumentally powerful person. That night, she had to swallow her pride and probably reconsider her life choices. Lin appeared in front of Nor again, immediately calling him sensei. She had decided once and for all that she would follow him everywhere until he accepted her as his page. Meanwhile, Prince Rain sat in his office, wondering what on earth his father was thinking. Handing a man of unknown lineage the black blade, some plot armor is just that strong. The prince recalled that the sword had been obtained decades ago during a dangerous dungeon expedition with the Sovereign Six. They had ventured to the deepest corner of the Dungeon of the Lost, acquiring a prime relic, the blade itself. Made from an unknown material harder than mithril or chalum, it was completely impervious to scratches, earning it the title of Unbreakable Blade. Clearly, this weapon was far more than just a sword. Rain figured his father had noticed the unrest in the kingdom, and was betting on Nor for reasons even he couldn't fully understand. Back with Nor and Lin, they were eating at a street stall. Nor worried that the princess might be seen outside, but she reassured him, saying she was first and foremost. Later, they arrived at the guild. The guild master noticed Lin with Nor but ultimately let it slide, offering them a goblin hunting quest. Since Lin was a B-rank adventurer, they could take it as a party. Of course, Nor couldn't resist asking if she was okay with him taking advantage of her rank. She casually replied that she was fine. After all, he was her instructor now. The guild master either had a poker face of steel or was deaf, because he didn't even blink at that revelation. After receiving the quest details, they left the city for the Forest of Beasts. Nor was excited. It was his first real quest outside the city walls. Lin was eager too. Finally, she would see her sensei in action. Once in the forest, Nor asked her what she knew about goblins. The question surprised her, but she answered as best she could, assuming it was some kind of test. Her reply confirmed what Nor already suspected. There was nothing he could teach her. They continued through the forest, puzzled that no goblins had appeared. Soon, Lin sensed a monster nearby, so they ventured further. Suddenly, the presence she had detected disappeared, but shortly after, Nor noticed the dismembered body of a goblin. After Lin cast a spell, they uncovered a huge goblin feasting on its fallen kin. Nor couldn't believe adventurers actually fought enormous creatures like it was nothing. They must be some kind of rare mutation, he thought. Observing Lin, he assumed she was terrified due to her lack of combat experience. But, in classic ignorance is bliss fashion, he told her they had to fight the creature because, obviously, it was just a goblin. This boosted her confidence tremendously. She now believed that even a goblin emperor, a fearsome subspecies of the Goblin King, was basically a minor inconvenience to Nor. Misunderstandings were reaching inception levels here. The Goblin Emperor launched its attack, but Nor parried every move with ease. His strategy? Act as a tank while leaving damage dealing to Lin. Unfortunately, the monster was incredibly fast, making it nearly impossible for her to land a hit. The goblin even began hurling trees at Nor, who parried them effortlessly. Meanwhile, Lin quickly spotted a mana stone embedded in the monster's forehead and realized that destroying it could turn the tide of battle. Of course, the goblin wasn't going to make it easy. It began throwing more trees, forcing Nor to nearly drop his parry rhythm. Lin cast a wind spell, repelling the trees and slicing the creature, but the mana stone kept healing its wounds. At that rate, their stamina and magic would run out, and Nor realized that if her magic couldn't pierce it, his sword probably wouldn't either. Then, a brilliant and slightly reckless idea struck him. He asked Lin to aim her wind spell at his back. She warned him that blast could demolish a castle, but Nor assured her he could withstand it with his sword. It was their only chance to become faster than the creature. Cue the Goku-level genius but idiot protagonist moment. Lin unleashed the spell, sending Na rocketing toward the goblin at incredible speed. Using every skill he knew, he braced himself against the blast and struck the mana stone embedded in the monster's forehead before it could react. The gem fell and the Goblin Emperor screamed, clutching its head. Lin quickly approached, holding the stone, and finished the creature with a precise fire spell, mercifully sparing it any extra suffering. Nor then approached, thinking he was done with goblin slaying for a long while. Clearly, this was why another protagonist for a Goblin Slayer-style scenario had just been introduced. Nor reminded himself not to get overconfident and dive headfirst into dangerous situations. What you really should do, he muttered, is properly assess your own strength before figuring out what's dangerous. But, hey, that would kill the entire anime premise. Some time later, a group of undercover agents briefed Prince Rain about a goblin emperor lurking in the Forest of Beasts, an absolute monster, several times bigger than a regular goblin king. Naturally, the prince suspected something abnormal and immediately blamed the Magic Empire for the incident. The mana stone embedded in the goblin's forehead was even suspected to be a demon's heart from the holy theocracy of Mithra. The agents reported that the princess had only sustained minor injuries. Rain was astonished. The monster had been hidden behind a powerful seal and had likely been lying in wait for days. This implied that even the Secret Corps hadn't been able to detect it. He then wondered how anyone could transport such a bulky object across the country undetected. If this was summoning magic, our sensory network should have caught it, he muttered. The agents? Apparently as competent as Disney showrunners in his opinion. When asked about signs in the surrounding area, the agents noted that the number of goblins had decreased, prompting the Adventurers Guild to investigate. But unsurprisingly, they had discovered nothing. Rain warned that similar cases might be happening elsewhere, and one agent handed him a report summarizing suspicious events from the past 3 months. Back at the guild master congratulated Noor on a job well done. Ever humble, Noor replied that it had been far harder than he expected and gave full credit to Lin for her contribution. The guild master, blissfully unaware that they had actually slain a goblin emperor, assumed Noor had merely observed the fight from the sidelines. He lectured him that goblins could be dangerous, even for beginners, classic misinformed advice style. Frankly, this guy was lucky the city hadn't fallen under his watch. To top it off, the guildmaster asked for the goblin's right ear as proof of quest completion. Noor and Lin exchanged a glance. They'd, burned the creature. Oops. Meanwhile, Prince Rain was reading the report summarizing suspicious incidents from the past 3 months. After some thought, he concluded the enemy might have already infiltrated deep into their country. He immediately ordered every member capable of search and uncover magic to form groups and investigate the designated areas. On top of that, he called for all 6 sovereigns, declaring an emergency summons. Once his men left, Rain berated himself for overlooking the obvious. He couldn't figure out why the Empire was pulling such schemes. Maybe it had something to do with their refusal to hand over that dungeon the Empire seemed obsessed with. Sure, he knew they wanted the dungeon's resources, but targeting innocent lives to achieve that? It was hard to accept, though the evidence was piling up. Back with our protagonist, Noor, he was happily munching food at a stall with Lin, who pointed out that at least they'd been compensated in the end. Come on, Guildmaster, dishonor on you, dishonor on your cow. Sure, he gave them a small first hunt gift, but no proper reward. Noor, meanwhile, wondered how long Lin planned to tag along. Her family had to be worried sick after all. Luckily for him, she decided to head home for now, though she promised to help him again if he didn't mind. Right then, Rain arrived. No hi, no pleasantries, just business. He asked Noor to head to a city in the mountain district the next morning, with Lin joining him. Rain promised a carriage, an escort, and payment, though he admitted he couldn't give many details yet. Noor quickly agreed, saying he just needed to pack. Rain assured him they'd cover all expenses. Later, the guildmaster chimed in again, telling Noor to relax since it was a sweet deal. Honestly, this man is speedrunning his way to the most useless guildmaster in anime award. The next day, the journey began. Noor was thrilled. He'd never ridden a carriage before and was excited to see the scenery. Lin, however, looked crestfallen, so much so that even a dense rock like him noticed. Sadly, with the social skills of a potato, he couldn't figure out why. She then apologized for her brother burdening him with this request, but Noor brushed it off, saying he was getting paid anyway. Noor still owed Lin for the goblin hunt. Cue flashback. Rain had told them the quest's true destination, the holy theocracy of Mithra. The fine print that only Lin noticed made it clear he was actually sending them as scouts, relying on Noor's hidden strength. Naturally, Noor, being dense, missed all the implications. Lin, on the other hand, connected the dots and got worried. Moral of the story: blindly following tropes can get you killed. Back in the present, Lin admitted she hoped nothing serious would happen. At that moment, Anis reassured them, after all, that was why she was there. But secretly, she recalled the prince's emergency order. If the royal capital fell into crisis, which he predicted it would, she was to take Lin and Noor and flee straight to Mithra. When Anis asked if Lin knew, Rain had said no, because if Lin knew, she'd definitely refuse to run. He insisted Lin's safety was more important than anything else, and only Anis could be trusted with the task. Yeah, this is giving off heavy flag-raising energy. Back to the present, Anis apologized to Noor for dragging him into such serious matters. Of course, Noor, blissfully dense, shrugged it off as just a simple trip. To reassure them, Anis demonstrated her divine shield, a light barrier that could block weapons and magic alike. Noor, of course, was impressed, thinking she might even rival Gilbert in strength. Meanwhile, he compared himself unfavorably. After all, a single goblin had nearly killed him. Somebody please remind him he soloed a goblin emperor. thanks. Then came another flashback, Anise's childhood. When she first discovered her power, Oken had told her her gift could become either a blade that cut everything or a shield that could defend against anything. Later, she was taken in by Sovereign Shield Dandel, who taught her to refine her abilities under the 6 sovereigns. But the training didn't erase her fear. Once, she accidentally hurt a friend with her power. Ever since, she distanced herself from others, afraid of repeating the mistake. She thought she had become detached from what people said or did, until she heard the name Nor. Her master Dandel held him in high regard, and that made her envious. A feeling that only grew stronger when Nor himself appeared before her. Anis reminded herself sternly not to let emotions cloud her judgment. She was the shield of Clay's kingdom, sworn to protect Lin with her life. At that moment, Nor spotted a strange trail in the wheat fields by the road. When he pointed it out, Lin quickly used her uncover spell, revealing a huge, bizarre monster hidden under a magic veil. Meanwhile, back in the capital, all hell had broken loose. Monsters swarmed the city, and the warrior corps struggled to hold them off. Rain immediately ordered the swordsman troop to block the roads while evacuating civilians. He then warned the king this was only the beginning, which the king grimly agreed with. To make things worse, the 6 sovereigns had already been dispatched to fight monster outbreaks in other regions. Divide and conquer, the enemy's strategy was painfully obvious. And yes, I'm still blaming that useless guild master. Fight me. Back on the road, the monster they had uncovered wasn't alone. The young boy was with it, clearly forced into something. But when their cover was blown, the Black Death Dragon smacked him aside before facing Nor. While Nor battled the beast, the boy stared in awe at his strength. Anis pointed out to Lin that the boy had appeared with the monster, meaning they were together. That last puzzle piece shocked Lin, because the boy wasn't just anyone, he was demon folk. Now, demon folk looked human, but were actually demi-humans who could form mental bonds with monsters at will. That made them much closer to monsters than to people, which is why everyone considered them abhorrent. They were thought to be extinct, but apparently a few descendants still survived. Lin recalled Rain's warning before she left the capital. Meanwhile, Anis explained that Black Death dragons usually lived in marshlands and rarely approached human settlements. That confirmed Lin's suspicion. The boy had manipulated the dragon to head toward the royal capital. Worse, the shock of being exposed by the uncover spell had likely broken his control over it. As Nor charged in to help, Anis couldn't believe he'd risk himself for someone like that. She thought it was a foolish decision, and for reasons she couldn't explain, it seriously annoyed her. Lin tried to jump into, but Anis stopped her, saying she wouldn't save Nor again. Nor, blissfully ignorant as ever, simply thought the monster was not very powerful and kind of slow. Sure, buddy, nothing screams not powerful like a dragon literally called Black Death. So Nor tried to hold out until Lin and Anis arrived. Unfortunately, the frog-looking dragon, seriously it does look like a winged frog, blasted him with a poisonous breath attack. Dodging would have meant the kid got fried, so Nor parried it anyway, and immediately got poisoned so badly he could barely move. That's when he finally realized maybe Anis hadn't been warning him about fighting a frog, but a poisonous frog dragon. Oops. Meanwhile, Anis explained to Lin that poison was the dragon's real danger. When Lin tried to rush in, Anis blocked her again, reminding her that the kingdom's survival literally depended on her. Then the dragon belched an even bigger breath attack, but Anis blocked it with her shield while apologizing to Nor in her head. Once the smoke cleared, she saw Nor still fighting, barely standing, but still swinging. She suddenly understood why her master admired him. His philosophy was to protect others no matter the cost, the mark of a true shield. Sadly, after parrying several more attacks, Nor collapsed, comforted only by the thought that he'd saved the boy. Cue flashback. The boy controlling the dragon wasn't evil, just cursed. At birth, some children were branded cursed because they could control beasts. Instead of being seen as useful, they were treated like garbage, beaten daily, tortured for fun, and displayed in cages like circus animals. This boy could even read minds, which only made the abuse worse. Despite all the cruelty, he never retaliated and never once wished harm on others. He just wanted to live without being hated. He just didn't want to see any more blood. One day a warden came to the boy's cell, accompanied by monsters, and offered a bargain. The boy could be useful to the nation if he went with them and controlled those beasts. The warden promised the demon folk would be valued, that the beatings would stop, and that the boy, and even everyone in the prison, would get better food and treatment if he agreed. Refuse, and the torture would continue or get worse. The man wore a magic device on his forehead, so the boy couldn't read his thoughts, but the warden had a reputation for keeping promises. Hungry and desperate to be useful, the boy accepted. When the dragon seal broke and it attacked, the boy blamed himself. He thought his presence would mean more suffering for everyone. He was ready to die, comforted only by the hope that, if he was reborn, he might be useful, and finally get to eat well. Death never came though, because Nor appeared and shielded him. The boy was shocked. He didn't understand why anyone would protect him. Nor fought with everything he had. But the poison and exhaustion eventually overcame him. He collapsed, satisfied that he'd saved the child. Flashback. The boy's memory of prison life. Some children, called cursed children, were born with the power to control magical beasts. Instead of being cared for, they were treated like animals, beaten daily, put on display in cages, mocked and tortured. The boy could even read minds, which made every insult and cruelty cut deeper. Still, despite the abuse, he never struck back. He hated being loathed and beaten, but he never wanted to hurt anyone. Another flashback to Nor. He paid respects at his parents' graves, then went to the mountains to gather herbs after returning from the royal capital training schools. Unsure which herbs were safe, he risked a meal and got poisoned. He bled and had to cast a low-level heal on himself, coughing blood but determined to keep training. He recovered enough to resume work, only to be bitten by a poisonous snake later. He woke up, realized he felt fine, and, because this is his life, ate the snake that had bitten him. Probably not in any survival manual. The next day, Nor caught another snake and let it bite him, because that's what normal people do before breakfast. To his delight, the poison spread more slowly than before, and he happily concluded he was building tolerance. He even thought he might unlock a new skill that way. Spoiler, he didn't. Instead, he just developed a taste for poisonous things. The result? He could eat them without issue, aside from occasionally vomiting a little blood. Minor detail. Back in the present, Nor got back on his feet, convinced he'd survive the dragon's poison thanks to his self-made anti-poison training program. He also admitted to himself that the dragon looked delicious, which was honestly all the motivation he needed. He dodged another attack and thought, yeah, I spat a little blood earlier, but that's nothing new. When he checked on the boy, he was relieved to see him alive thanks to the detox effect of his low-level healing spell. The battle resumed with Nor parrying every strike, forcing the dragon to damage itself with each blow. The kid looked on in awe, marveling at how this man could solo such a terrifying beast. Finally, the dragon gathered power for an enormous breath attack, the frog's ultimate all-or-nothing death strike. But before it could release it, Nor parried the attack, making its head explode like an overripe watermelon. Anis, Lin, and the boy were left utterly speechless. After the dust settled, Nor inspected the massive corpse. Sure, it was dangerous, but all he could think was how tasty that giant frog must be. He turned to the kid and asked if he was okay, then wondered how he had even gotten there. The boy admitted he was the one who brought the monster, because he had promised to lead it to the city. That shocked Nor, not because he realized the implications. No, advanced deduction like the frog was meant to attack the city was beyond him. Instead, his brilliant reasoning concluded the obvious. This frog was probably meant to be eaten. In the end, Nor assumed the boy had been traveling incognito to stay safe and avoid getting robbed. As for the poison, he figured a large city would have the proper techniques to handle it. In his mind, those frogs were probably raised like cows on a farm. His delusions went so far that he felt guilty for ruining the boy's precious delivery. Honestly, someone should clarify things for him, but watching him suffer is way more fun. He apologized to the boy and even offered to pay for the damage. The boy flusteredly refused, insisting it wasn't necessary. Then Nor asked how he had gotten the frog there. The boy revealed he could control monsters. Nor's eyes practically popped out of his head. That's amazing! Are there others in the world who can do that? He asked. The boy, confused, said it was something he'd been born with. Nor, undeterred, exclaimed, "That's a talent gifted from the heavens." The boy, on the verge of tears, finally admitted he was a demon folk and explained that all demon folks could do that. Immediately, Nor launched into a flurry of imaginative plans he would have executed if he had that ability. The boy, surprised by Nor's sheer audacity, asked if he wasn't afraid of him. Nor shrugged. Some people might fear or hate that power, but honestly, that's super useful. Ignore the haters. Hearing this, the boy began crying. For the first time, someone told him he could be useful. Nor reflected that, unlike himself, the boy had been blessed with a truly remarkable talent. Soon after, Lin and Anis arrived. Nor assured them he was fine thanks to his poison tolerance. Still, Lin couldn't believe he had survived. After all, the poison wasn't just any toxin, it also carried mana, an extreme kind that could even corrupt the soil. The only way to survive a direct hit from that stuff was to have a sacred spirit instructor. The Sovereign of Salvation had once shown Anis a technique honed like a saint's body and mind. It purified everything it touched, a perfection Nor had finally glimpsed at the end of his unconventional training. Afterward, Nor introduced the boy to the ladies, who immediately went on high alert. In a very convoluted chain of deductions, Anis and Lin realized the boy was a slave manipulated by some mysterious person to attack the city. Naturally, no one bothered to explain to Nor why demon folks were hated, or even that people hated them at all. Undeterred, Nor told the ladies he wanted to give the boy a ride to the nearest city. At first, Lin hesitated, but then she remembered her father's advice. Don't be swayed by rumors, trust your own eyes. She agreed. The boy then introduced himself as Rolo. Lin asked if they could take him along, but Anis was about to refuse. Nor quickly intervened. If there wasn't room for her, he could take the boy's spot in the carriage. Anis explained that demon folks weren't allowed entry into the holy theocracy of Mithra, their destination, which made taking him along complicated. Leaving him behind, however, would make survival nearly impossible. Just as they were mulling over the dilemma, a mysterious warrior appeared. A mysterious newcomer, wearing a handkerchief over his eyes and giving off a menacing aura, appeared before the group. He spotted the dead frog and scowled, telling Rolo that he had ruined the delivery he was supposed to make. Nor immediately asked the man if he had been the one who sent Rolo with the monster. The newcomer shrugged, replying he was just a hired hand. Then he asked if Nor had killed the frog, to which Nor quickly apologized, explaining he didn't know it was an important delivery. The man didn't care about the delivery, his business concerned the boy, Rolo, whom he had been hired to retrieve. Hopeful that Rolo could return home safely, Nor asked if that was his mission. The newcomer confirmed, claiming the boy was worth quite a lot. Before Nor could react, the man vanished behind him and attempted to attack. Nor parried, demanding why he was attacking him. The man replied coldly that Nor was in the way, and that he had been doing Rolo a favor by planning to kill him himself rather than letting his client do it. Nor, still parrying furiously, insisted he didn't understand what the newcomer meant. The man just smirked, saying he didn't need to understand, and leapt over Nor to strike Rolo. But Nor was faster, blocking the attack and even breaking the man's sword in the process. Meanwhile, Lin was utterly confused. The pair moved too fast for her to follow. Anis instructed her to stay close. Back in the fight, the newcomers switched to dual daggers, but Nor parried those attacks as well, finally drawing the man's anger. "I'll have to lop your head off first," he growled, unleashing a strike powerful enough to send Nor flying several meters, even though it was parried. That's when Nor realized this opponent was stronger than the Minotaur he had faced earlier. The man acknowledged that Nor was tough. One of his daggers had broken. Not ready to give up, he produced another dagger and continued his relentless assault. Nor realized that fighting while protecting Rolo would quickly drain his stamina. The newcomer, meanwhile, wondered why his opponent hadn't fallen yet. The battle was so intense that Anis had to activate her divine shield to protect both herself and Lin from the shockwaves. She warned the princess that, if they got too close, they'd be swept up in the chaos. For her, there was no mistake. This bizarre newcomer was Deadman Zadu, a former S-rank adventurer. Anis recalled what the 6 sovereigns had told her. Deadman was officially dead, and even Gilbert and she were advised not to fight him. He was far too strong. As a child, he had mastered the ancient art of dwarven alchemy, and by age 13, had earned the title Dragon Slayer. In short, he had reached the apex of adventurers. Unfortunately, he had turned to the dark side. Some in the guild even suggested stripping him of his adventurer's license, but his contributions were significant, including single-handedly taking down disaster-level monsters. The guild leaders were divided, so the matter was put on hold. By now, Deadman had become a mercenary, taking any job as long as he was paid, and he had even wiped out a country's army and royal family. Back in the present, Deadman was clearly enjoying the fight with Nor, who could only parry his attacks. Anis explained to Lin that countless adventurers had tried to claim the bounty on dead man Zadu's head, but it always ended in mountains of corpses. Eventually, the guild had publicly announced his death to prevent further pointless casualties. Meanwhile, the last of Deadman's daggers broke, and Nor justified himself. After all, the attack had come out of nowhere. The man, however, was puzzled why daggers made of orichalcum and dragon tusk had broken. Deciding to play it safe, Zadu switched to his main weapon, a cross-like sword. He threw it upward, splitting it into dozens of copies, introducing it as Silver Cross. He taunted Nor, saying he could break as many swords as he wanted, since he could easily make more. He then hurled all the swords toward Nor and Rolo. Although Nor parried many, he had to endure several hits to protect the boy. Anis realized she had to help, but her mission was clear. Ensure Lin made it safely to exile, so she forced herself to stay put. Finally, she asked the princess for permission to leave and assist Nor in battle. Back in the fight, Nor kept parrying Deadman Zadu's swords. When another wave of blades threatened to impale him, Anis used her divine shield to block them, much to Nor's surprise. What he didn't know was that Anis had realized the best way to protect Lin was to keep Nor alive. She even used parts of her shield as swords to keep Zadu busy, while instructing Nor that they needed a new strategy if they wanted to win. Her plan: she would focus on defense while he took the offensive. Nor quickly came up with an idea. Grabbing one of the frog's fangs, he told Anis that on his signal, she would need to remove the shield in front of him. The plan worked perfectly. Fragments of the fang destroyed the copies of Zadu's sword. Naturally, the former adventurer was not pleased. He immediately tried a surprise attack on Anis, but Nor parried it, leaving Zadu stunned, especially since his adamantite sword had broken. Nor apologized again for breaking another weapon, but Zadu waved it off. Instead, he asked how Nor could anticipate and counter his attacks. Even Nor wasn't entirely sure how his ability worked. Zadu then declared he wasn't going to attack again. After all, recovering mithril shards after they shattered was a real pain. He hinted at a flashy celebration in the royal capital, though he refused to explain what he meant. One last surprise attack failed, and Zadu, exasperated, called Nor exceptionally screwy before disappearing, lamenting the lost pay he would have earned for taking Rolo back. Once Zadu was gone, Nor began chatting with Anis and Lin about the royal capital's party, even suggesting they could go back. But then Rolo fell to his knees, trembling. When Nor asked what was wrong, the boy explained he had heard that the largest monster had been sent to the city, powerful enough to wipe it out entirely. Nor didn't fully understand, but Lin sensed trouble and urged them to return. Anis disagreed, trying to mention Rain's instructions, but Lin cut her off, insisting she already knew. After all, she was Rain's little sister and understood his thinking. Nevertheless, she insisted they go back. They had to warn the others. After all, if their homeland fell, they could face the same grim fate as the demon folks. Anis had to agree, but reminded Lin to stay by her side under any circumstances. Nor then asked Rolo what he wanted to do. The boy said he would go with them. He knew he could barely do anything, but he was certain that anyone taking that monster to the royal capital should be a demon folk like him. Meanwhile, Nor stared at the horizon with a contemplative look, which Lin mistook for him being moved by Rolo's backstory. In reality, he was just sad that he wouldn't get to taste the frog's meat. The quartet then began their journey back to the royal capital. While Lin considered it her duty to bring along the legendary warrior, Nor, the one who had defeated the Black Death Dragon and fought the infamous Deadman Zadu, as reinforcement. Back in the royal capital, Rain walked through a devastated street when a knight approached him. Almost all citizens in the old city had been evacuated. The Sovereign Six had fended off the enemy's ambush, but Rain warned that another wave was likely coming. The knight added that the Secret Corps was desperately searching for the enemy, with no results so far. Rain realized the enemy was trying to exhaust their forces and prepared for the next big wave. Suddenly, he noticed something strange in the sky. Casting Uncover, he revealed a dragon of calamity hovering above. A flashback showed Nor's father teaching him as a child about creatures called devil dragons, notorious for wreaking havoc. He explained how an adventurer had once slain one by cutting off its head and how the dragon's scales, claws, fangs, and bones could be used to craft high-quality weapons and medicines, bringing wealth to the land. That adventurer became a hero, known as the Dragon Slayer. Young Nor immediately declared he wanted to become a Dragon Slayer too. His father warned him it wouldn't be easy. Some dragons had lived for thousands of years, could make the ground tremble with every step, and even crumble mountains with a single tail swing. The continent had nearly been destroyed long ago by rampaging dragons. Back in the present, Nor was pulled out of his daydream by a strange sensation. The group was in the carriage, looking out the windows, unsure of what he was sensing. A few seconds later, they finally saw it, the Dragon of Calamity hovering menacingly outside the city walls. Meanwhile, the citizens of the royal capital were terrified as the enormous creature slowly flew above their heads. The dragon was so massive that its shadow covered an immense portion of the city. Even Rain couldn't believe his eyes and asked if the Empire truly understood the horror they had unleashed. The knight beside him replied that, according to records, it had only been 150 years since the dragon had fallen asleep, meaning it should have been dormant. Rain groaned. Those fools of the Empire had awakened it. He couldn't fathom why they'd use such a destructive weapon over a simple dispute. At that moment, the dragon flapped its wings, generating winds strong enough to severely damage the city. Rain ordered the knight to round up anyone taking shelter and evacuate them immediately. He emphasized that no one was to remain in the capital, even if it meant carrying them out personally. Meanwhile, atop the city walls, Mayan of the Sovereign Six reported sensing powerful magic obstructing all evacuation routes, making it nearly impossible for the six sovereigns to unite. Each of them was busy fending off monsters that had appeared across the city. Inside the castle, Gilbert advised the king to take refuge because they wouldn't survive if the dragon reached the palace. The monarch, however, insisted that the warriors focus on protecting and guiding the citizens, while he attended to his own duties outside the city. Anis, using her binoculars, observed the city and remarked that in the presence of that dragon, total destruction was inevitable. She added that evacuation should already be underway. Lin, distressed, feared her father would act as a shield, despite knowing he was no match for the beast. Tears streamed down her face as she silently begged him to leave. Nor, still seeing the dragon as an enormous frog, because apparently winged frog logic never dies, was more fascinated than fearful. He asked Lin if her brother and father were still in the city. She confirmed that they had likely stayed behind, making the situation even more dire. Undeterred, Nor declared that he could handle it and suggested using the same strategy they had applied against the Goblin Emperor, because nothing screams, "Let's fight a city-destroying dragon like remember that time with the goblins." Lin quickly understood Nor's plan. He wanted to use the wind blast to increase his speed. She hesitated, worried he would take a serious hit, but Nor reassured her, saying his sword would absorb the brunt of it. He added that he owed a lot to the people of the city and her father, so helping them escape shouldn't be too hard. Hearing that, Lin scolded herself for doubting her sensei. She reminded herself she couldn't judge him like a normal person and decided to trust his lead. Meanwhile, back in the castle, the king walked through a corridor, recalling his tense conversation with the emperor. The emperor had threatened to destroy the kingdom if he refused to hand over the Dungeon of the Lost, even calling the king a coward for not using the dungeon's resources to build a military force capable of controlling the world. Finally, the dragon landed in the city. The king, surveying the devastation, muttered that the emperor cared about nothing except seizing the dungeon. He admitted he had underestimated his enemy, never expecting such an all-out attack, and realized that letting negotiations break down had been a grave mistake. The king reached the roof of one of the castle towers, recalling his daughter as a little girl running happily in that place. He admitted he might not be the best fit for a king. He was more suited for the battlefield. Apologizing to his subjects for being a foolish monarch, he promised to at least take one of the dragon's eyes with him, though he knew it wouldn't fully redeem his mistakes. Back with the heroes, Lin and Anis prepared a special setup to enhance the wind blast. Shortly after, Nor was effectively transformed into a human bullet, launched by a cannon-like magical device designed to condense and amplify the spell's power. Meanwhile, the king prepared to confront the dragon that had already crushed a large part of the capital. Before he could strike, the dragon readied a breath attack that shocked him, his son, and nearby soldiers. It was the same devastating attack that had once scorched the continent hundreds of years ago. The king smiled grimly, realizing the dragon might not even give him the chance to retaliate, but he decided to face death with a flash, drawing a special weapon and declaring his intent to fight. The dragon was about to learn a painful lesson about how tenacious humans could be. Even the Sovereign Six had stopped their work to witness the confrontation between their king and the beast. At the last moment, just as the dragon and the king were about to clash, Nor arrived like lightning and parried the dragon's attack, astonishing everyone watching. The dragon, bewildered that a tiny human could counter it, became enraged and tried to crush the ant-sized intruder under its tail. Unfortunately for the monster, Nor parried the tail attack too, though he was pushed back. Meanwhile, Anis, Rolo, and Lin finally reached the city. Seeing the destruction caused by the dragon, they rushed to find the king and escape. Sadly, debris fell from a castle tower after the dragon's tail strike, knocking all three off their horses. To make things worse, a group of goblin emperors, smaller than the one Lin had fought alongside Nor, was heading their way. Recalling Nor's teachings, Lin reassured Anis that facing mere goblins was nothing. Smiling, the vice captain agreed, though the princess's attacks caused no damage. The goblins reached the trio, but a protective shield kept them at bay. Seeing the danger, Rolo used his powers to paralyze the monsters, allowing Lin and Anis to easily dispatch them. The princess was awed by the power of demon folks and admired Rolo's courage. But there was no time to waste. They had to keep moving. Back with Nor, the dragon, furious that its attacks were being parried, continued assaulting him. The worst part? Its supposedly indestructible body was sustaining heavy damage, while Nor's sword remained unscathed despite massive impacts. Changing tactics, the dragon took off, preparing another breath attack, confident it couldn't miss this time. It fired a powerful energy beam at Nor, who of course parried it with ease. The dragon roared in frustration, and Rolo explained to Lin and Anis that the creature was not only angry, but also frustrated, because Nor refused to treat it as a serious threat. The king noted that dragons were prideful creatures, especially the one before them, who believed itself unmatched. Watching the fight, it became clear the dragon had finally admitted that the small human in front of it, Nor, was stronger. Yet the monster did not surrender, attacking again, only to lose a claw while being parried once more. Finally, the dragon fell at Nor's feet, its eye color changing. Rolo interpreted this as the dragon submitting, leaving everyone flabbergasted, including Nor himself. He recalled his father's words about the legendary hero who became the dragon slayer. Yet in that moment, Nor admitted he didn't feel like hero material and didn't want to kill the creature. Immediately afterward, Lin, Anis, and Rolo rushed to his side. Under the watchful gaze of the king, Nor greeted everyone with a big smile. Lin asked if he was okay, and he replied confidently that he was fine. He finally understood what had happened and thanked Rolo for his help. Nor had assumed the boy had calmed the dragon, but Rolo quickly denied it. Nor realized the kid didn't want others to know about his ability, which explained his denial, and wisely decided not to probe further, leaving another small misunderstanding between them. Later, Nor asked Rolo if he could send the dragon back to its origin, but Rolo disagreed, saying the creature was far too dangerous. Nor, being his usual stubborn self, said that while he understood the risk, it would be better to avoid killing the dragon if possible. He was aware this was selfish, but asked them to at least consider it. In the end, Lin agreed and asked Rolo if he could do it. The boy hesitated, citing the dragon's immense power, but Nor whispered to him that it was okay. Neither Lin nor Anis were afraid. After a little while, Rolo revealed that the dragon had promised to obey its master, which startled the group. Nor realized the dragon considered Rolo its master, and he asked the boy to command it to quietly return to its home and never harm humans again. Rolo complied, and the dragon took off, leaving the city. Unfortunately, at that moment, a magical beam struck the dragon, causing it to fall. From a distance, the emperor watched, smiling with delight. Everything couldn't have gone more perfectly, she said, thinking that even a dragon that had lived thousands of years was nothing more than a pawn. Confident that the city would be destroyed, she ordered her forces to attack. A soldier then cast a spell, revealing the Empire's army, thousands of heavily armed soldiers, ready to march on the royal capital. A flashback showed how the emperor had planned everything meticulously with her officers. A well-known beast tamer had awakened the dragon of calamity, bringing it under control at a high cost. Once the dragon rampaged, their army would advance, equipped with magic swords, shields, elite armor, magic cannons, and advanced devices like mobile mana bulwarks and ultra-high-output mana ray weapons. However, while the emperor celebrated her expected victory, a knight named Randus interrupted her. After apologizing for his bluntness, he remarked that he didn't see how this war would truly benefit their country. In the long run, he begged the emperor to reconsider. Unfortunately, the emperor was not in the mood for pleas. Mercil kicked the knight aside, saying he had heard enough and that no one could threaten their empire. After all, they stood atop the pinnacle of magical technology. Why wouldn't they flaunt it in a war? Back in the present, the emperor declared that soon history would tell of the Clay Kingdom as a land of fools, ruined by their selfish greed for neglecting the upkeep of the Dungeon of the Lost. Meanwhile, the empire would be remembered as a humanitarian army that liberated its people from a rather silly monarch. After all, history only needed one version of the story, right? Our protagonists, Noor, Lin, and Rolo, arrived at the dragon's fallen site, unsure if the beast was alive. At that moment, Lin spotted the army of the magical empire, and unsurprisingly, they spotted her too. The emperor and one of his men quickly realized the princess and the divine shield were among the quartet. The monarch even guessed that Anis might be the reason the royal capital hadn't been completely destroyed. After all, she was one of the living legends. But the emperor, ever the drama enthusiast, thought it was just perfect to have found them. Legends had ruled the past, but now wisdom reigned. He ordered his men to fire the bonnet at the quartet, confident that even Anis, the divine shield, would evaporate into nothingness. Another legend about to bite the dust. The joys of war. Almost immediately, a magic beam, reminiscent of the one that took down the dragon, shot toward Anis, who could only watch helplessly. Luckily, Na reacted in time and parried the beam, astonishing everyone, including Rolo and Lin, who had taken cover thanks to Anis's warning. Some Empire soldiers muttered that it must have been a misfire from the mana condensation process. The Emperor, predictably, was not amused and ordered the bonnet fired again. Meanwhile, Noor had no idea what the attack was, but he was awed by the sheer size of the Empire's army. Lin explained that Duras III had mobilized his troops, thousands, maybe even 10,000 soldiers. Noor was utterly confused, and Denise simply said, "All we can say for sure is that those brutes are here to annihilate our kingdom." Lin observed that their small group couldn't hope to fight against such overwhelming numbers. The vice captain reminded her that there wasn't much they could do there, they had to retreat. The princess agreed and suggested they regroup with her brother. Then she asked Noor what he planned to do. Naturally, another misunderstanding arose. Noor intended to run, but Lin assumed he was going to fight alongside them. Before anyone could clarify, another volley of magic beams rained down on them. Luckily, Anis was ready and blocked the attacks with her divine shield. The Emperor, ever the drama king, was furious. One of his men suggested taking cover in the rear, so the monarch began to retreat, ordering his troops to finish the job quickly. Meanwhile, Noor realized the beams were keeping them pinned and decided to distract the enemy to buy Lin and Rolo some time. He suggested they use the chance to escape. Though he admitted he wasn't great at fighting, he was a seasoned escape artist after all. He'd once run for his life from a swarm of angry bees. Lin hesitated but eventually agreed. At that moment, Rolo noticed another bonnet about to fire. Lin decided to use the same strategy they had employed against the Goblin Emperor. Noor didn't object. She unleashed Wind Blast on him, and our protagonist began parrying not just the magic beams, but also the attacks of the Imperial soldiers. In the next instant, countless swords and shields soared through the air, astonishing the Emperor and his officers. Noor landed behind them, and all the disarmed soldiers ended up being struck by their own weapons, like a deadly rain from hell. To the Emperor's despair, Noor didn't stop. He continued parrying every attack from the Imperial army, causing more destruction. Even 3 of the massive Bionx machines were destroyed, leaving only one standing. Finally, Noor appeared behind the Emperor, who recognized him as one of the people who had been with Anis back then. The Emperor couldn't fathom how Noor had moved so quickly. When Noor turned to face him directly, the Emperor grew fearful. He guessed that Noor had marked him as the target. Still, the monarch recalled that he had his Kaiser armor and Kaiser sword, both made of orichalcum, which gave him some confidence. With that, he prepared to fight. Noor, however, ignored the Emperor entirely and went straight to dismantle the Bionx. The massive magic weapons were hurled into the sky, crashing so close that the emperor barely escaped with his life. Desperation finally sank into the monarch's heart. He had 10,000 soldiers, all perfectly equipped, with magical weapons capable of surviving dragon breath and slaying dragons. But none of it mattered against a single man. Nor appeared in front of the emperor, who was now sprawled on the ground. The monarch gasped, Who are you? And why haven't you killed me yet?" That's when he noticed the weapon Nor was holding. Memories flashed in the emperor's mind. This was the dungeon relic he had coveted above all others. The sword was made from an unknown metal, supposedly too heavy for any normal human. Even King Clay, known for his freakish strength, needed both hands to wield it. Yet here was a man who had not only carried it, but also crushed the imperial army by himself. The emperor could only theorize, Nor was keeping him alive to savor the humiliation before delivering the final blow. The same fate he had planned for King Clay. The torment became unbearable. In a mix of fear and shame, the emperor soiled himself, mounted his horse, and fled like a madman, thinking of Nor as some unstoppable monster. A flashback revealed the truth. Nor had never intended to destroy the empire's weapons. He had simply been parrying the falling swords and shields, preventing soldiers from reclaiming them. The destruction of the magical gadgets was purely collateral damage. The irony. While annihilating the army, Nor was worried about the old man in flashy armor on the battlefield. Little did he know, that terrified old man was the emperor himself. Back in the present, once the emperor escaped, Nor finally felt the toll of pushing his body to the absolute limit. Coughing up blood and half-kneeling, he leaned on his sword for support, still refusing to collapse completely. Various terrified soldiers of the Empire were closing in on Nor, intent on killing him, while our protagonist began to lose consciousness, hoping that Anise, Lin, and Rolo had managed to escape safely. Luckily, Gilbert and his master arrived just in time to rescue him. Nor immediately became a full-blown fanboy after witnessing the overwhelming power of the Sovereign of the Sword, who was effortlessly cutting down enemy soldiers. Meanwhile, the healer and the wizard of the Sovereign Six were grumbling about Gilbert's master killing soldiers. They still needed alive for interrogation. Soon, the healer got serious and warned the wizard to act quickly before another member of the Sovereign Six arrived. Together, they combined their powers, imprisoning the remaining soldiers and healing them afterward. Witnessing all his former teachers in action, Nor doubled down on his fanboy enthusiasm. He couldn't believe he was seeing them again. What he didn't realize was that some of his former teachers recognized him immediately and quickly went to assist him, alongside Lin, Anise, and Rolo. A very concerned Lin hurriedly healed him, while Gilbert's teacher reported that a commanding officer had already confessed under interrogation. The Empire had thrown everything, including the dragon and other beasts, at the capital. Sadly, the Emperor had managed to escape. This revelation surprised the wizard. He couldn't believe that such a decrepit old fogey had appeared on the battlefield. According to Gilbert's master, the Emperor must have been overly confident in his resources to pull that off, to which the wizard muttered that it was a foolish move for someone who demanded to be called a wise ruler. By now, the wizard suspected the Emperor was losing his marbles. Nor then intervened, explaining that he had seen the Emperor a short while ago, and that the horse the ruler was riding had sparkling gold gear, making him hard to miss. The wizard deduced that the Emperor was using orichalcum saddlery, top-tier equipment capable of supporting an array of skills, which explained the ruler's rapid escape. Of course, the wizard couldn't resist adding that the Emperor's fashion sense was as poor as his attitude. Finally, Gilbert's master reminded everyone that if the Emperor reached the border, they wouldn't be able to pursue him easily. A fortress and a ravine-spanning bridge stood in his path. According to the wizard, catching up by normal means was basically impossible, though, with Nor, normal was never really a limitation. If there was a way for them all to fly, Nor had an idea, assuming, of course, that the dragon was still alive. Shortly after, Nor, Lin, Rolo, Anise, and the wizard arrived at the place where the dragon had fallen. The wizard immediately lit up, thrilled to see a legendary creature up close. While the healer was equally pleased, it was his first time tasked with healing an enormous dragon. San began tending to the dragon, telling Nor that he had grown quite a lot. At that moment, the wizard realized the man with them was his former student. After some friendly greetings and teasing, the wizard asked Noor if he thought riding the dragon was a good idea. After all, having everyone on its back didn't seem particularly safe. Noor reassured him, reminding the wizard that they had Rolo with them. The wizard then asked the boy if he was confident in his abilities. Rolo admitted he wasn't, which only worried the wizard further, but Noor stepped in to support him. Before they could discuss further, the dragon woke up. Noor instructed Rolo to use his ability. The dragon roared, signaling its anger. Rolo confirmed that the dragon not only wanted revenge, but also wanted Noor to command it, leaving the wizard utterly flabbergasted at the boy's control over such a massive creature. Naturally, Noor gave all the credit to Rolo, and when the boy tried to clarify, the dragon roared again. Rolo then announced that the dragon was ready to go immediately. Noor told everyone to get ready, and surprisingly, the first to step forward were Lin and Anis. Lin explained that no one could communicate with the dragon if Rolo didn't go along, and she and Anis would guard him. She then asked Noor if he would join them. Noor began to sweat. He was afraid of heights, but felt it would be awkward to sit out after dragging Rolo into this plan. He reluctantly agreed to go. Lin beamed and said having Noor with them was like having the strength of 100 people. San added that he was also coming because he was responsible for the dragon's recovery. He jokingly noted that he specialized in diplomacy, referring to Karu, the thief of the Sovereign Six, who had also arrived. Noor was thrilled to see another former teacher and asked if he would join them. Karu replied that if they were flying on such a huge beast, well, they'd better stick together. They would need the concealment skill. Oken, the wizard, took that opportunity to declare that he was going along too. But San reminded him that he still had to supervise the stone cage used to imprison the imperial soldiers. The wizard sighed and reluctantly agreed. Right after, Rain and his father arrived. The prince announced he wanted to join as well, since they'd need a negotiator. Lin was thrilled to see her father and older brother, while the king offered a half apology for causing her worry. The vice captain kneeled before Rain, ready to accept any punishment for disobeying his orders and returning to the capital. Rain, however, shrugged it off, blaming himself for issuing such a brilliantly idiotic order, and admitted he was glad she made it back safely. As the group prepared to depart, the king reminded his son that he was in charge and apologized to Noor for repeatedly asking for his help, before asking him to look after Lin and Anis while the dragon took off. Dunder then asked Sig, Gilbert's master, if he was okay with letting Noor go without a heads up. After all, they'd finally found him. Sig replied that he'd never really needed them to play a role in Noor's life, and found the idea that they could take him in and raise him laughable. Dunder agreed, remarking that Noor was like a hero straight out of the legends, and that it almost made him laugh. Sig recalled the moment he witnessed Noor's full power, the swords, shields, and magic weapons flying through the air, and admitted he was ashamed of his own laziness. He realized he had no right to teach others while wasting time, and decided to retrain himself from scratch, recognizing his shortcomings. Dunder seemed pleased, noting that a man so ashamed looked surprisingly happy. Sig confirmed it, saying anyone who had seen such a spectacle would naturally feel joy. Sometime later, the dragon continued flying, but there were no signs of the emperor. Rain wondered if the ruler might have already returned to the empire. They were nearing the border when Karu advised caution. Recklessly rushing past could be dangerous. Just then, Lin finally spotted the emperor, who was already crossing the bridge marking the border between the two countries. Karu spotted the emperor as well and warned that he was approaching the imperial capital's defenses on the far side of the bridge. He added that if they crossed into enemy territory, they wouldn't make it back in one piece. Their concealment would vanish the moment the enemy detected them, rendering all magic ineffective. The prince considered the warning, but responded that letting the emperor escape was not an option. After all, the ruler had access to powerful magical tools, which could massively strengthen his military. They couldn't give him the time to do that. Lin understood her brother was right, but felt a twinge of fear at what might await them. Inis quickly intervened, requesting permission from the prince to annihilate the entire area if it was going to be the emperor's escape route. After all, she reasoned, it would be smart to obliterate their defenses while they still had the chance. Hearing that, Lin fully understood the vice captain's fury. The royal capital she had vowed to protect had been trampled, and she had no intention of letting the enemy get away with it. The prince not only approved Inis's plan, but also told her to give it everything she had. Without hesitation, Inis unleashed her full power, obliterating the imperial defenses at the border and securing their escape route. Rain then turned to his sister, reminding reminding her that their actions here would determine the course of the war. They would continue pursuing the emperor, even if it led them back to the capital itself. He asked if she was ready. Lin's answer was immediate and confident. She trusted completely in the strength of everyone by her side, especially her teacher. What Lin didn't know was that Noor, who looked remarkably calm from afar, had actually passed out. Meanwhile, the emperor finally entered the imperial capital, a sprawling cyberpunk city full of neon lights and hovering vehicles. Fuming with frustration, he took an elevator, muttering about how infuriating and vexing the whole situation had become. Once he reached the throne room, all his officers visibly worried at his disheveled state. The emperor roared in anger, berating his soldiers for their lackluster performance, despite being equipped with high-caliber weaponry. His officers tried to inquire what had happened, but their questions were cut short when everyone noticed the Dragon of Calamity hovering above the city, very much alive. The emperor was astonished. He had been certain the Bonnic had killed it. His first thought, the dragon had been resurrected somehow. Perhaps the diabolical Sen of the Sovereign Six had reached a new peak with his healing magic. Yet even that didn't explain how the dragon now obeyed their commands. Clearly, some demon folk were involved. Demanding answers, the emperor barked at his officers about the whereabouts of the beast tamer. One replied that Master LW had already left for Serenza, citing urgent business. That confirmed the emperor's suspicions. The beast tamer had switched sides. Enraged, he grabbed the reporting officer by the collar, lifted him off the floor, and demanded why they hadn't stopped LW. The officer meekly explained that the emperor himself had ordered special treatment. Naturally, the emperor threw him to the ground. Another officer tried to calm him, but the emperor snapped, ordering him to stop standing around like an idiot and to come up with a plan, promptly sending him out of the hall. Then, turning to the remaining officers, he demanded the coronos be readied. They were startled. One explained that the weapon was still in testing, dangerously unstable and not properly aligned. Using it in the city could cause catastrophic collateral damage. The emperor cut him off with a dismissive kick, reminding them that the disaster was already in front of their eyes. "We only need one shot to kill the beast," he declared, eyes blazing with fury. At that moment, the officers almost immediately complied. The coronos, a massive city cannon, began to charge as the emperor proudly declared it the greatest technological marvel of the empire, developed under the wise leadership of Duras III, the so-called Light of Judgment. Unfortunately for the empire, Noor managed to parry the cannon's attack, leaving the emperor and his officers flabbergasted. They couldn't understand why the trajectory had changed, and to make matters worse, the energy beams spread, raining down on the city. The new target? Their own mana furnaces. Panicked, the officers abandoned the command center, convinced the city was doomed. Seconds later, the beam destroyed the furnaces, and the emperor fell to his knees in despair. Meanwhile, Noor and the group were descending into the city, with Karo reporting he had lost track of the emperor. Apparently, some thick wall was blocking any precise detection. Rain suspected the monarch had taken refuge in a monometal building. Just as the cannon fired again, Noor awoke. Reflexively, he parried the beam, astonishing everyone. Sadly, the impact sent him flying off the dragon, but using his sword as a shield, he smashed through walls and landed safely. At the same time, a knight, formerly an officer, who had pleaded with the emperor to calm down, returned with reinforcements. Rather than help, these knights intended to kill the emperor, since no one else would obey him. As the knight prepared to strike, Noor landed and stopped him. The old man, rather than feeling relieved, was terrified. To make matters worse, the other knights misinterpreted Noor's actions as protecting the emperor and attacked him. Noor, giving the emperor a literal ultimate beating, because moving him quickly was the fastest way, tried to reason with them, but the knights refused to listen. Eventually, the knights explained themselves. They wanted to offer the emperor's head to the invaders as a gesture of surrender. San and the others arrived just in time to say that dead men couldn't atone for crimes, and there was no need for that. Noor then left the hall with Lin, letting Rain and the others handle the rest. Once outside, Rain approached the emperor, who was on the verge of tears, begging for forgiveness. Rain calmly recited all the emperor's crimes, but, surprisingly, added that he was willing to forgive him. Noor listened as Rain explained that the emperor would have to experience the same suffering as the victims of the empire's attacks. Rain added that the monarch would feel all the pain without dying. After all, he was a healer, and the emperor had to participate in the multinational talks on reparations and ending the war, which were approved by the Circuit of 10. The emperor, confused and horrified, asked what rain meant. Rain clarified he could cry and scream to his heart's content, and Karu reassured him that even if he lost consciousness, they'd revive him. Unsurprisingly, the old man ended up peeing himself. Outside the hall, Rolo was napping on the dragon, while Lin tended to Nor's wounds. Nor felt guilty seeing the destruction caused by the cannon beam, worrying he might have killed innocent people. Lin comforted him, explaining that the destroyed buildings were mostly Mona constructions, though it would still affect the lives of the imperial capital's citizens. Sometime later, Rain and the others arrived to announce that everything had been settled. Nor was puzzled, considering how quickly things had been resolved. He didn't understand why both nations hadn't simply talked it out from the start. As for the emperor, he had abdicated, and his grandchild would inherit the throne. The Circuit of 10 then arrived, and apologized to Nor for the earlier misunderstanding. Nor accepted the apology but cheekily advised them to reconsider their morals if they thought ganging up on the elderly was acceptable. The leader of the knights thanked Nor for stopping them, otherwise, the empire would have descended into a nasty civil war. They promised that in the future, they would spare no expense to assist him. Nor apologized for the destruction he had caused, but Randus, the imperial sorcerer, and leader of the Circuit of 10, reassured him. So far, there had been no reports of casualties, and the Empire's own crimes had been far worse. Eventually, Nor and the others safely returned to their country, and reported everything to the king. Both the king and Prince Rain thanked him for his incredible contributions on the battlefield. Nor, ever modest, declined any rewards, which surprised everyone. The king insisted he couldn't refuse, as it would set a bad example. Finally, Nor requested the king's help for Rolo, who had no family. The king asked if Rolo was a demon folk, and Nor confirmed it. He then asked that Rolo be allowed to live in the capital, and enjoy a normal life like any other citizen. Nor also added that since they had previously offered him a house and land, they could provide those to Rolo, along with some clothes and food. The king agreed but explained that for that to happen, the boy would need to become a citizen of the kingdom. The monarch asked Nor if he was okay with that. Nor replied that Rolo had saved him countless times, and that the huge dragon had only followed his will because Rolo was with him. When Rolo tried to clarify, Nor cut him off, adding that if it weren't for him, the war wouldn't have ended so quickly. The king hesitated, knowing that the holy theocracy of Mithra considered demon folk enemies, and granting citizenship could strain international relations. Before the monarch could respond, Nor added that he didn't need anything else. Any reward should go to those who had lost their homes. He insisted the kingdom should focus all its resources on rebuilding, which surprised everyone. In the end, the king agreed. Sometime later, Rolo was sleeping, recalling the terror he felt when he believed he was going to die. The boy woke up in an unfamiliar room, and was soon guided to the dining room by Anise, who informed him that from now on, he would live with her. Noticing that Rolo was lost in thought, she pulled him out of his reverie, warning that the food would get cold. As he began to eat, Rolo couldn't stop crying. He still couldn't believe he was enjoying such delicious food. Ines smiled, assuring him that no one would take it away. Nor then walked through the capital, observing the ongoing reconstruction and reflecting on the destruction's severity, wondering if Auntie Stella and the workers were safe. Eventually, he reached the guild headquarters and was happy to see it had survived. He noticed the signboard on the floor, quickly grabbing it as he hadn't seen it in a long time. A flashback showed a younger guild master shocked upon learning that Nor had spent 3 months practicing at every training school, without acquiring a single decent skill. The guild master refused to let him register as an adventurer. Back in the present, Nor marveled at reuniting with his former instructors after 15 years. Another flashback revealed the royal capital 15 years earlier, with a young Nor asking Sig to train him as a swordsman. Sig asked if the boy had a permit from the Adventurers Guild, a classic bureaucratic twist to the heroic grind. Nor didn't waste any time and showed the permit. Sig warned him that the training would be grueling and asked if he was prepared to endure it. The first day, Sig predicted that Nor wouldn't last more than 3 days. However, 10 days later, the member of the Sovereign Six had to admit that the kid's tenacity was nothing to scoff at. Later, Nor managed to parry a huge iron ball with a wooden sword, but he injured his arm and dropped it, earning a scolding from Sig. Undeterred, Nor gritted his teeth, grabbed the sword again, and continued. Sig was shocked. He couldn't believe the boy's eyes still burned with determination after having his body and mind pushed to the limit. That was the moment Sig realized Nor might have a promising future. Curious, Nor asked when he would learn a skill and what type. Sig complied, demonstrating a powerful technique capable of cutting several leaves in a flurry of rapid movements. Nor was amazed, but Sig was even more astonished when the boy not only followed the technique, but managed to replicate all the movements, albeit slower. Sig confirmed that, with proper training, Nor's latent potential could even surpass him. 2 months later, however, Sig couldn't believe that Nor's only learned skill had been parrying. Frustrating, since all he needed was one truly useful ability. A month later, the training ended, and Nor still hadn't gained another skill. Next, Nor trained with Dunder, who warned him that this training would be tough as well. Dunder explained that a warrior's role was to be a shield for allies. 2 months later, Dunder admitted that Nor's progress surprised him. He was tough and gutsy, but he still needed just one useful skill to become an invincible shield. A month later, the training ended, and the story repeated. Nor still hadn't mastered a useful skill. Later, Nor asked Mayan to let him join her training camp. She set up an impossible test to justify refusing him, but Nor hit every target perfectly, forcing her to accept him. Still, she begrudgingly limited him to throwing stones, thinking teaching him properly would be troublesome. Eventually, she allowed him to use a bow, but Nor's strength crushed every bow he touched, including hers. 3 months later, the camp ended. Mayan told Nor to leave, though she admitted that even without a proper bow, he had already learned enough to survive. Next was Kei's camp. Unlike previous instructors, Kei accepted Nor without hesitation. However, Nor passed all the tests head-on rather than in the subtle, spy-like way they were designed, missing the point entirely. 3 months later, despite Karo acknowledging Nor's strength, he had to tell him to leave, simply because Nor couldn't follow the way of the spy. In fact, Karu even considered inviting him to join the royal capital's intelligence agency in case Nor gave up on becoming an adventurer. Next came Oken. 2 months into his training camp, Nor still struggled to use magic. Oken suspected that no mana flowed through his body at all. The only hope was for Nor to enter the mana residence room, a place that drastically amplified all human senses. Oken warned him to leave immediately if it became overwhelming. Days later, Oken was informed that Nor hadn't come out yet. The instructor freaked out. One person remaining inside for several days could easily die. But Nor was calm, claiming he was okay, and that his body felt fine. He even told Oken to leave him alone, as he was on the verge of a breakthrough. 1 month later, Nor emerged, having learned only one spell, a tiny fireball that danced on his fingertip. Oken was amazed. It was rare to see someone so incapable of magic make any progress at all. Yet Nor had advanced far despite his lack of mana. To top it off, he could cast a fireball with his other hand as well, making him a dual caster, something Oken had taken 50 years to achieve. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough for Nor to become an adventurer, which left him feeling dejected. Oken thought it was a shame. The boy had immense talent, and if only his body had been more attuned to magic, he could have become a legendary magician. Finally, it was San's turn. The priest asked if Nor had undergone the rite of blessing as a child. Nor had no idea. Sen explained that only pre-selected students who had undergone the rite could train at that school, but Nor refused to leave. Days passed outside the temple in freezing snow, and Nor nearly passed out from hunger and cold. Just in time, San arrived, healed him, and agreed to let him participate in the basics of the training, though there was no guarantee he'd actually learn a skill. 3 months later, Nor managed to learn low heal, which impressed San. Sadly, that skill wouldn't be recognized as sufficient to become an adventurer. Disappointed, Nor decided to leave, but before he could, San stopped him. He explained that even though the skill only worked on minor scratches, it was impressive that Nor could use low-level healing magic without a natural blessing. The priest realized that Nor had performed a miracle on his own without undergoing the rite or using a holy spirit as an intermediary. This meant he could wield the power of miracles without limit. The next day, the Sovereign Six held a meeting to discuss Nor's case. However, he had already disappeared from the capital. San lamented not having stopped him the day before, while Mayan argued that they could let the boy be since he was strong enough to handle things on his own. Nevertheless, San disagreed, insisting that if they invested time in nurturing Nor's gifts, he would undoubtedly become extraordinary. Oken immediately agreed. Dunder admitted he had never imagined Nor had gone through similar challenges at the other schools. San reaffirmed his proposal to train and guide Nor, and in the end, all 6 agreed. Sig then tried to set off to find Nor, but the others reminded him they had agreed to search as a group. Back in the present, Noor entered the Adventurers Guild and handed the signboard to the guild master. The guild master asked why he hadn't gone to Mithra. Noor explained that after seeing the state of the city, he had turned around and rushed back. They discussed how tough things had been. Later, the guild master informed Noor that the construction guild boss had been searching for him. He needed help hauling rubble and building temporary housing. That night, Noor was still helping the construction workers, who were grateful for his aid. He reflected on all that had happened that day, from traveling in a carriage to subduing an empire, defeating 2 dragons, and meeting Rolo along the way. Meanwhile, the king spoke with Rain about how the holy theocracy of Mithra had been secretly working with Duras during the war. Rain acknowledged that peaceful days might be rare going forward, but the king reassured him that the nation had capable people to depend on: Gilbert, Anis, Rolo, Lin, the Sovereign Six, and, of course, Noor. Speaking of Noor, he was starving after working all night, but the princess gave him a piece of bread so he could continue. While eating, he reflected that he wouldn't be where he was without everyone's help, though he still hadn't given up on his dream of becoming an adventurer. At that moment, the construction guild boss asked him to move some rubble. Just then, Noor noticed that a nearby building was collapsing. He activated his parry ability and deflected a falling piece of the tower, saving his bald boss. And that marked the end of the final episode of this anime.